Greetings, Black family, and welcome to On the Wake Up Radio. I am your host, DC Radical One, and you have entered the center. Excuse me. Shout out to our wonderful producer, Cindy Ashby. You can check us out on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and now iHeartRadio at On the Wake Up Radio. Again, I am your host, DC Radical One, and you can follow me on Instagram at DC Radical the numeral one. That's on Instagram at DC Radical the numeral one. You also can follow me via Twitter on at DC underscore radical underscore ONE, and that's at DC underscore radical underscore ONE. And today we're going to do a show that I'm looking forward to. We're going to have a guest. Y'all know I don't have many guests, so it's always special when we bring guests to the show. And the subject matter is Africans don't like Black Americans with a question mark. And we're going to have our brother Quasi. He's going to be here, and we're going to chop it up on that topic. Greetings to Sister Salima. I see she's in the building. But before we do that, we're going to recap last night's show. For those who missed it, last night we had I thought, a very productive program. Special Saturday night edition of the Center, where we discussed. I did one. It was just for the sisters. The Sisters Guide to Dating While Conscious, and we just gave the sisters some tips and some discussion about what they should look out for as they try to come into this quote unquote conscious community and try to find themselves a complement, someone to build with. So I found that if you didn't get a chance to check that out last night, you can go to the On the Wake Up Radio YouTube page. It should be up now, and you can check that out. BB4ODA to Philly E-Babe, good to see you as well. And greetings to By Any Means Necessary. So that was last night. And today we're going to have a totally different topic. But before we get to the topic and before I bring the brother on, I'd like to make an announcement. We always have announcements. We have the Straight Black Pride Convention coming up again, August 22nd and 23rd. So that is Saturday and Sunday. So that's 3 weeks from yesterday. And Saturday, August 22nd at 2 p.m. at Everlasting Life Cafe, 9185 Central Avenue, Capitol Heights, Maryland. We're going to have live music from DJ Rick, and we're going to have a special presentation discussing Memorandum 46, America's Divide and Conquer Strategy. And that presentation will be done by yours truly. And then on the next day, on Sunday at noon, we're going to have the SBPM free cookout in the park. That's Sunday, August 23rd at 12 p.m. Randall Circle A in Fort DuPont Park. And that's 36 F Street and Maryland Avenue, Southeast, Washington, D.C., 20019. So if you are in the area, come on out to the cookout. If you're somewhere where you're not quarantined in, come on out. You're not on the banned list, which seems to be increasing in this area, come on out. And if not, you just had to miss out. And both events are free. So that is that. Now, Philly eBay say last night's show was very informative. Asante Sana, thank you. Asante Sana to you, sister, for your support. And Sister Salima says, talk black to us. That's what we plan to do. Now, today's show, again, we're going to talk about the seeming rift between Africans here in America and those on the continent. And this is a thing that I'm, of course, seeing a lot of on social media, more so than in actuality. But we're going to discuss the whys and wherefores and the perceptions of both groups of people. And I see we have Lord Vale has joined us again. Greetings, brother. And we have TJ. Greetings to you. So, what I'm going to do, I am going to bring on my guest. Let me make sure he is ready. And we will bring him on as soon as he is ready. But with that being said, this brother Crazy, is someone that I follow on Instagram, and I just saw the brother's work, saw what he was doing, saw how he was studying, and some of the work he was doing in the community, and I was like, man, I like this brother. I'm gonna have to build with him, and I don't get to catch everything he does, but the things that I got to catch were outstanding. So with no further ado, I'm going to bring Brother Quasi on now. Brother Quasi, are you there?
Peace. I'm here.
Peace, brother. How are you?
I'm doing well. Michiamo to all my Africans out there.
Now break down what that means.
So Michiamo is like greetings to y'all in Chi.
Got you.
Yeah.
Now, I think you have me playing in the background. Can you turn that down?
All right, let's see here. Right, might be. Can you still hear it?
Let me see. Yes.
Okay, I probably have to.
You might have to get a set of headphones.
Okay, 1 second here.
So while the brother is, while he's trying to get himself together, as you see, he is a student of African languages, and he is a student of African languages, and he studied with Baba Kambone's son.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me now, brother?
I can hear you well.
Okay. So we don't have the echo no more.
I do not hear the echo, so I think we are good.
All right, perfect.
Okay. I was just letting the people know that you had studied with Baba Kambone's son, studied languages with that. Can you get into that for it?
Yes. So back in what really started back in June of last year, I went to Ghana for about 3 weeks for the first time. And then, just obviously got to experience the whole Akan culture out there, customs, because, it's, they're the main ethnic group across Ghana. And then, so I just really loved everything about the country. And, I just kind of got a vibe that I wanted to start doing a lot of work and build in there. So then I took interest in wanting to learn the language. So this past November, so November 2019, a comrade of mine referred me to Dr. Kemban's son. And so then I joined his website and I started taking some of his courses in, the Akan / Asante Chi dialect, which is that's the most prominent dialect spoken across Ghana today, as far as because there's different versions or variations rather of Tree. So you have like Asante, you have Equapim, and others. So, but that's the most prominent, obvious, with the Asante, which we call the Ashanti people today. That's kind of like the more anglicized way of actually saying their name.
Right.
But that's we know how famous and prominent they are today, and even in Western culture, as far as groups that or ethnic groups that we're familiar with. So I got into that past November, and it's just really broadened me, even scholarly, to see the connections between, diasporan history as well as continental. So
Okay. I remember seeing those pictures, you and your queen, and I was like, I'm not gonna lie, brother, I was a little jealous. I was like, man, I was like, this brother over there living it up on the continent. He might not even come back. They treating him like a king and everything, getting him royal robes. And I was like, look at that, man. That should be me over there with him.
yeah, I didn't want to come back. I was 3 weeks. Like when you get there for the first, after the first 7 to 8 days, and you just see how peaceful it is. You get to taste the food. It's not processed. Everything's just very organic, and you just see just beautiful black people everywhere. You see lines of businesses and very together families. Very, very together families. That was like that kind of made me a little jealous. I can't even lie, So
Yeah, brother. I mean, everybody that I know that talks about Ghana that is gone, they really, really enjoy themselves. Very quickly, let's see who else has entered the building. I see Sister Misty has entered the building. Straight Black Pride, Sister Misty. Um, but yeah, so you can give a shout out to Baba Cambone's son and his website, and just let people know about that.
yes, absolutely. So Baba Kambone's son is Okunini Obadele Kambon. He chooses the term Okunini. It's kind of a title that's been used in Akan culture, but it can also be used to refer to those of as a doctor, which he prefers to go by Okunini instead. He's very big on, Africans, even in the diaspora, for us using terms that are, more from our indigenous languages and cultures. And so he goes by again Okunini Obadele Kambon, and you can find his website, which is www.abibitumi.com. So those of us who are familiar with Bibi Fahodie, meaning African liberation, Bibi Tumi just means African or Black power in the Akan or Chi language. Bibi or Abibi is interchangeable for Black or African. So the way they say like African as a person, they say Obibini, which means African person or Black person. They're interchangeable in the language.
All right. Thank you for that. And I believe Philip E. Babe has put that in the chat for those who are interested. It's an excellent website, and I have been meaning to really try to delve into the language. At the current moment, I have so many things going on. I can't dedicate the time needed for the scholarship that and the work that I would have to put in to make the type of progress I want to make. So, but hopefully, I got some things in the works that free up some time. So, the next thing I wanted to get into, we have to explode some myths. We have to destroy some myths. And the first myth, because you were on the continent, you saw the slave dungeons and things like that. Man, can you address the Africans sold us into slavery mythology?
Absolutely. So in Ghana, there are multiple dungeons. John Henry Clark, he kind of talks about on the coast of West Africa, depending on how you look at it, it's, 40 some dungeons. Most of them are relegated, of course, to the coast because that's where the Europeans were organized at throughout the transatlantic enslavement system. And I really get away from the term slave trade as much as possible, as Baba Baruti, tells us to reject it. Mama Marimba Ani tells us to reject it, and many others, of course. So I went to the three of the most prominent ones, which was Elmina, Osu, and Cape Coast. Elmina was the first of those, which was built in 1482, and Christopher Columbus and his father actually were there at some of the earlier construction of it. So if you read Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust by John Henry Clark, he talks about how in Christopher Columbus's journals, how he was sailing down the coast of West Africa decades before he came out to the West. And this is because he was a part of the original colonial conquest or campaign of the Portuguese in particular. So, Elmina was the Portuguese fort, and John Henry Clark talks about how when the Africans didn't want to accept the Bible story, they had to accept the gun story. So some of the colonial information, and this is getting into the whole sold this into slavery thing, right? Some of the colonial information, even when you go to the dungeon, you'll see some of this prevalent because, our people haven't just been miseducated, of course, on this side of the ocean, but even on that side as well. So again, back to John Henry Clark's book, where he talks about Nana Kwamena Ansa refusing and giving pushback to the Portuguese who wanted a permanent stake, essentially, in Ghana at that time, which, of course, it wasn't a country of Ghana, but we're talking about that, that area of West Africa, essentially. And Kwamena Ansa, parts of his speech are in the book that John Henry Clark John Henry Clark's book of him resisting the Portuguese and wanting this stake. There are variations to the story of what happened when the Portuguese were attempting to negotiate a piece or a plot of land so they could build Elmina. But when you kind of look at it from various sources, Kwamena Ansa is very hesitant at the minimum to allow the Portuguese this permanent stake. So they literally forced their way in, as John Henry Clark discussed. And the Africans that are actually relegated to the coastal area of that area, they not only resisted, but they killed some of the Portuguese representatives who were actually beginning the construction of Elmina, because they were destroying their villages, their homes, all of that, because it was a pretty large set of land, because obviously it's a fortress. And so that was how the Portuguese really got their way in. 1481 was when they started construction. 1482, they finished construction. And the initial relationship was, or at least what they were claiming they were looking for, was gold, which is why they called it the Gold Coast, more specifically Portuguese Gold Coast. But as Nana Leonard Jeffrey says, is that they were really interested in enslavement the entire time. And so it's a really long story, really, to get into all of the collaboration that took place on the coast of West Africa in terms of the so-called transatlantic slave trade or transatlantic enslavement system. But the myth that we have to dispel initially is that Africans were not resisting, or Africans just willfully gave up our people. It's just a bunch of nonsense. In fact, when you're in the dungeons, you will see just how often resistance happened inside and even outside of the dungeons. At Osu, and I have a video of this actually, of a sister who was touring me around there. They actually, which was a Danish fort. So this one was, not even a Portuguese one, but this one was a Danish fort. And the Danish actually created, they cut out these holes in the sides of the castle to place cannons at all, of the various, around the castle, essentially. And it's because the castle was raided and invaded so many times, Africans trying to break out captives who were enslaved there. Because many of our people, not only were we enslaved, of course, in the Americas, but, many of us were enslaved in the dungeons and, we either died there or we were kept there as prisoners, essentially. So some of us never left. Actually, one of my comrades, who is one of the tour guides at Cape Coast, his great grandfather was enslaved at Cape Coast himself. Now, this brother was born and raised and still is there to this day in Cape Coast. And his great grandparents, through oral tradition, passed down his experience through his family. So he has a lot of that. I'm about to actually do an interview with him pretty soon, so he can break down a lot of that. That was that's just a big lie of our people just bending over backwards and allowing the Europeans to just come in and take us with no resistance. There's a number of books that get into this. Fighting the Slave Trade is one book. There's a lot of great information in there. There's about 483 documented coastal revolts that they document on that book. And that would not include Nana Queen Nzinga's resistances as well, because a lot of that happens more towards the interior, and other wars that also happened in Africa. When we start getting into the Africans that actually collaborated with Europeans, you have to put that into the proper context versus what I just did, basically, of how the Europeans organized this. And over time, the Europeans, through coercion, through manipulation, through trickery, they were able to create divide and conquer tactics between Africans, but not always Africans. A lot of times it was done with mulattoes as well, to basically create wars between one another, with all of the importing of guns, gunpowder, of course, that came with that. And like I said, also enslaving our people and keeping them at the dungeons as well. Many times, if you get into Nana Chancellor-Williams' book, there's a part where he says, the wide use of black agents, usually mulattoes, were, the secret weapon of the white man, basically. And he also says later on that page of how they would take, these agents and train them to hate blacks more than they would hate whites, essentially. And then they would do the bidding of their white masters. So that's really what happened when you're looking at any form of collaboration, when you see, Africans who may have collaborated in the 1600s or the 1700s. But, if you don't get into all the history from the 1400s, the 1500s, and the early parts of the 1600s, you won't even see any of the plethora of resistance that happened. So I've even considered, doing my own kind of case study on that work, because there's not enough of that out there. And, you got people like Henry Skip the Truth Gates, who wants to assert the notion that, Africans are the ones to blame for this and not the Europeans. So,
Brother, you touched on so many points that I'm so glad you touched on. You touched on beautifully the resistance, which people like to ignore, of course. And also, remember, those of you who are listening out there, remember this mulatto discussion that we are currently having, that the brother just mentioned, that we're about to have. Now, everybody that's read Destruction of Black Civilization understands the whole mulatto problem. But that precedes even what you're talking about with West Africa, going up into the whole situation with the Islamic slave trade, even going all the way back to ancient Kemet. Can you get into a little bit of that with how the race mixing produces people who ultimately are our worst enemies?
absolutely. So, much like Professor Williams breaks down, obviously in the Mulatto Problem chapter, but throughout the book, really, of how essentially these mixed children, they're produced largely out of rape. And, when African women were being sex trafficked in the north and the eastern parts of Africa, the byproduct of this rape would create, this half Arab, half black child. And then obviously in the European system, the same thing, except, they'd be half European, half black, right? And so basically the European did something very similar to what the Arab did, and obviously why is because, Professor Williams brilliantly outlined in his work is that there's no difference between them really, right? They're all whites essentially. So basically why it was so problematic and still problematic in various ways today is that these mixed children, they would be given separate classifications. You see this in South Africa actually today, and Professor Williams hits on that in the same chapter. So South Africans who are half Dutch or Boer, or what they call them, Afrikaners today, which is nonsense that they even have anything African in them, their ethnic or racial identification. And they call these mixed people, though, even South Africa, they call them coloreds. So they don't identify with the blacks of South Africa. They identify more with their white parents, and oftentimes it's usually a white father, like I said, because it was usually coming out of African women who were being sex trafficked, and they would grow up with this utter contempt for their African mothers, despite them being raped. The African mothers were enslaved in their society. So talking about the Arab, of course, and so they were relegated. The African women were relegated to the lowest floor in their society. So what the non-African, parent would do is augment this mixed child to a position in society that was relevant or almost comparable to, the white or Arab parent himself. And that would create this ideology and this mentality in him or her that, oh, I'm better than the other, than even my mother, because my mother is a slave in this society, and I don't have to be a slave myself. And through that process of decades and decades of creating that, they literally created whole armies of mixed breeds, who, as like Professor Williams said, they would do the bidding of their white parents. So the Europeans did the same thing also in West Africa, which that's what caused much of the conflict. There's a book I also have. It's called Africans. Africans. It's spelled Eurafricans. Africans in Western Africa. It's written by an author called George E. Brooks. This is a whole nother book about mulattoes, but it separate from Professor Williams' book, essentially. And it gets into what the French did. It goes into more specific European powers. So it talks about what the French would do with their group, or the English, and so they had different classifications for them. They would call, if you were the byproduct of a half black, half English, they call you an Anglo-African. If you were French, they call you a Franco-African. The Portuguese, what they would do with their mixed breeds, they call them Luso-Africans, and so they would often be the middlemen in the entire organizing of the so-called slave trade. Our people really, really got to get in and study this stuff, man, because there's so much, there's so many moving parts. Like I said, it's not just as simple as the Europeans showed up on a boat like they show us in the movies, and then they said, "Hey, I just want to buy some Africans." No, that's completely false. But these mixed children, much like in Eastern and Northern Africa, in ancient Kemet, but also what they did in Western Africa, because they had African mothers, they oftentimes would learn the indigenous languages. This is very key. So they could speak the language that, whatever ethnic group that they were coming from, usually. And because they still had African DNA, they would bear a number of course, of our phenotypical or physical and genetic features, to where, a lot of them still would look like they were black, of course, especially when you're dealing with very dark-skinned Africans, 16th, 17th century, and even before that with the Arabs slave trade, right? And John Henry Clark talks about how in as far as the Arab slave trade, when they were able to create a dark-skinned mulatto, that mulatto could now get more into the interior and would meet less resistance than maybe the Arab or white that was attempting to come in and imperialize, enslave, and conquer the people that they had just raided. So they became premier slave traders and slave raiders for the European and also the Arab system. And so, that history has to be really documented and spoken about correctly. So, we make that distinction of what our historical relationship has been with them.
Brother, that was excellent. Um, as far as the Arab slave trade, that is an area of study that I don't think we as Black people have really delved into enough. And really, from my reading of history, without the Arab slave trade disrupting the area of North Africa and causing confusion there, along with at at a similar time, the Arabs and the Blackamoors being pushed out and coming back into Africa from Europe, that caused a lot of disruption that, in essence, softened up West Africa for that that attack from Europeans. And to go along with what you're saying about the mulattoes, if we look at the Sudan situation, I don't know if you studied that, but can you get into the Sudan situation and how that really is a manifestation of what we were talking about earlier with the Arabs and creating a whole new people, as it were?
Yes. So Sudan, yeah, I could touch on a couple of things about Sudan. Well, really, what's funny is Sudan is actually an Arabic term for black. So I've heard some people who said, I know there's some there's some Negroes online who say that, oh, we didn't start calling ourselves black, or we didn't start calling ourselves this until we were enslaved in America in the 17th century. It's all false. The Arabs who came there, they called that area Bilad al-Sudan, which translates in Arabic to land of the blacks. So the Arabs were very clear about what we were calling ourselves and who were the people that occupied that area first and foremost. And so when we're looking at Sudan and all of the conflict that has, it's been, it's almost like, to me, I feel like it hasn't stopped really. Realistically, what's going a lot along with in Sudan, or what's going on in Sudan, is very similar to what you would see in Libya recently, and even Mauritania as well. And so basically, because there has been so much invasion there, and so much raiding, constant raiding, and like I said, the Arab, when we really look at their so-called slave trade, it never ended. It's still going on in various ways. Like I said, I brought up Mauritania. Mauritania was the last place in the world to legally, and I got to put that in quotes, legally abolish slavery. This is in the 1980s. So if we're looking back at Professor Williams' book and studying what was a big incentive for the Arab in enslaving Africans, it was about creating African women as concubines and systematic rape, and as a byproduct of that, you created so many mixed breeds, so centuries of that happening, to where you've now created whole groups of hybrids. And so that's really what's going on with a lot of the warfare and the destruction that we see in Sudan today. But most of us, because we don't know, or a number of us at least, who don't know that history in Eastern Africa predominantly, we can't make that connection as to why those things are still occurring. Because, like I said, it never ended. It's like when Baba Baruti says the scramble of Africa never ended. I mean, because it didn't, you know. So that's for the most part what's really operating there, even to this day.
Yes, sir. And as you mentioned, Mauritania, I remember I was on Twitter in like 2013, 2014, and I was tweeting some things and talking about at the time Pan Africanism, and there's a reason I don't identify as that anymore, but we'll get to that later. And a brother from Mauritania sent me a message and was like, "Can y'all help us? Can you publicize what's going on? They're still enslaving us here." And now this was before the whole Libya thing ended up popping off. And I was shocked because I didn't know. I thought, like you said, legally they had passed whatever they had passed in the 80s. So I just made, of course, the assumption, not having any knowledge, that some semblance of liberation had taken place, not having any idea what was going on until that brother reached out to me. So that just goes to show that every just like oh man, I'm drawing a blank. The people in West Papua or West Papua, I believe that's how it's supposed to be said, but they're having a fight with I believe the Indonesians right now, and they're murdering them wholesale. So when our people try to, we just look at our situation here in the West. I think we really have to understand that African people are under assault globally. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. It's funny that you brought up West Papau because I actually learned about the whole situation through Brother Irritated Genie. I had no knowledge of it until I don't know how long he's been covering. Obviously, I think a few years. But that was when I first learned about the entire conflict, and it's been going on, from what I understand, for some decades. Yeah, our people across the world are under siege. And it's the same thing when you look at Africans in Brazil. Actually, statistics show that Africans are killed in Brazil, at an astronomically higher rate than even we see of us happening here in the U.S. I've seen all types of videos of Caucasoid police officers just murdering black people in the streets in Brazil. I try to get away from watching those videos, but sometimes you're just scrolling and they hop right in they pop up right in your face. Um, so it's really, like you said, it's a global assault happening to us everywhere where African people are at, and there is non-Africans from even in parts of India, because you also have black people who are in parts of India. And we know about how big of a racist that Gandhi was himself. And it's black people, in Mexico and many of these so-called Hispanic countries, that we're taught mistakenly here in the United States that they're our allies, and which is more nonsense. But we're everywhere we turn, we have enemies all around us. And this assault, has been going on for thousands of years. And I think that's really why it's so important to understand even the fine details of what Professor Williams is illustrating in his book, when he really says this is a 6,000-year war going on here. Because if you make the separation between the European and the Arab and those on the landmass of Asia, or the continent of Asia, and you don't really connect the two, which is why Okunini Obadale Kambon, he never calls them Europeans. He calls them Eurasians. And the same thing with the Arab, because when you look at Europe, it's connected. It's not separated by any water. It's not really a continent. It's connected to Asia. So all of those people from there, where we're talking about Syrians, whether we're talking about the whites that you see in Israel, because there are black people in Israel too who are also being murdered. Um, Whether you're talking about Lebanon and all of those countries in that pocket, essentially, have waged war upon African people, and then obviously with the Chinese coming to various parts of Africa today to exploit the people, and you'll even see that in Jamaica as well too. So there is no area for us where we are completely either sovereign or free. We are fighting non-Africans directly and indirectly at every corner.
Yes, sir. I don't know if you ever saw my Africa versus everybody lecture, but I documented what was going on at that time with us and all of these people. Needless to say, it was quite an extensive lecture because, as you just stated, our list of enemies is quite long. Um, Real quick, can you get into just a little bit of what's going on the continent with the Chinese? Because that's something I don't think people have really paid enough attention to see what's going on.
Yes. So Um, I mean, the Chinese. I think it would be best to really study. Amos Wilson actually predicted a lot of this back in the '80s and early '90s. Of how the Chinaman is basically going to be the new white man pretty soon. As we know, whites are at a negative birth rate in the world, and China has really grown immensely strong in the last generation. And they're really just coming to start their new form of colonialism and imperialism in Africa, exploiting Africans in a various set of ways. Mainly economically, you see a lot of this, but also, there's been quite a bit of racial tensions between Chinese and Africans on the continent. I think, sometime, I want to say maybe earlier this year or at the end of last year, there were some restaurants in Nigeria that were being closed down, that were Chinese owned, and they were denying local Nigerians access to come to these restaurants. One of my comrades, he's from Senegal, and he told me that in certain places in West Africa where the Chinese are settled at, they have rules where they either don't serve Africans at all, or they have certain times when Africans can actually come to their establishments. Speaking in terms of restaurants, but can come to their establishments and basically eat. So the same thing that we experienced here in the '60s, with Jim Crowism, right? So there's that, and then really the loan situation. See, because what our people have to realize is that the transatlantic enslavement system really, really underdeveloped Africa. It depleted Africa of resources, and the Europeans were looting Africa before the Berlin Conference. In the 1400s and the 1500s, like I said, that's why the Portuguese and the Dutch, they called their colonies, which is what we call Ghana today, they called it the Gold Coast because they were looting gold all of those years. So, and then they took obviously the most important resource on the continent, and that's our people, of course. So, from the millions of Africans that were stolen from Africa throughout that entire process as well, with the destruction of cultures, destruction of communities and nations. There was also the process of looting a lot of the resources out of Africa at that time. So then there was an exponential amount of debt that accumulated over about 4 centuries until you get to the Berlin Conference, 1884, 1885, and then that just that was pretty much the Thanos effect after that. It just really doubled down on all of that. So our people today, what we have to understand is that these countries that have gotten so-called, and I put that also in quotations, liberation or independence, many of them haven't been really free for long, at least in terms of having somewhat of an independence recognized, and all of these places, the Europeans have left them with a large amount of debt. So it's the same thing that the French did with Haiti. Basically where it was like, okay, Haiti, all right, well, you want us to recognize your independence in 1804. Well, now because we've had various amount of economic damages, for us not being able to get, all the sugar that we were getting out of Haiti, and us losing all of our investments in terms of the Africans that we enslaved there, because now you're free. You're going to have to pay this independence bill, basically. And that is what has depleted Haiti. Haiti is now, in terms of GDP, is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And it's the same thing that you're going to see in many of these African countries. So when you see all of this debt, now the Asian or the Chinaman has come in and said, look, all right, well, we'll develop your countries now. Because these countries have been suffering, for the better end of 50 to 60 some years, Ghana being the first, recognized independence, 1957, right? And so many African leaders and even local Africans, unfortunately, they have mistakenly, they've fallen for that Jedi mind trick of thinking that, the Chinaman is different than the white man. And so they have, a number of their administrations have accepted these deals with China, and like I said, they're coming in the waves of a set of loans. Which basically, what's going to happen in a number of these is that they're going to have astronomical interest rates, which the Africans are not going to be able to eventually pay off, and then they default on these loans, and in return, the lands that are in Africa will then be handed into, they will be transferred more into Chinese hands, and really further adding more to their economy, where, they'll be able to now add more investment for themselves, hire more of their people, and then actually have more of their people settle in Africa. So there's a lot of that going on right now. It's just a new form of colonization, basically, with a new face.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, brother, I have to agree with everything you're saying. I I'm trying to remember the name of the book. A European wrote it, and he talked about how they would make these deals with these foreign leaders, and it's kind of a carrot or the stick deal where you can agree to do certain things and agree to allow multinational corporations to come in and do certain things in your country, or you could have an accident. And I think that that playbook is probably still going on with our leaders, but we don't hear about it as much. And when the title of the book comes to me, I will mention it. But right now, I'm drawing a complete blank. But I wanted to ask you real quick: did you see the situation in Zimbabwe with the quote unquote compensation to the white farmers? What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, that was pretty devastating to see that. Really, it's like they're undoing everything that Robert Mugabe did. And Zimbabwe, that's also left out of the Western media narrative. Zimbabwe ran into the issues that they did, following all of the sanctions that were put on Zimbabwe. Um, and what's unfortunate now, and I kind of assumed that was going to happen, because Mugabe didn't willingly step down, even though he was old, in his 90s at that time. There was a coup d'état that put him out. And I don't know the name of the president who's the president there now, but basically what I have read is that the people that did get a lot of that land back through Mugabe's land grabs are still getting to keep the land, but now they're having to, pay billions of dollars to all of the whites who lost the land, essentially through that new joker of a president. So I think ultimately what's going on there is I feel because from the international lens of what Mugabe was doing and taking the land away from the whites and giving it back to the blacks, how that has looked to the Western world. The new president, I feel, is just trying to appeal to the Western world, and particularly the United States, which saying, hey, look, we're not going to make this a whole racial thing, and we're going to rectify the policies that previously harmed all of these Caucasoids in Zimbabwe. So it's pretty tragic to see that. But from what I understand, I haven't seen anything since then. But from a couple of days ago, from what I understand, there were a number of Zimbabweans that were actually preparing to actually go and protest just various governmental policies, and I am under the impression that that's going to be one of them, of course. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yes, sir. And the book I was thinking about was Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And if anyone has read that book, it is an excellent book. And if you haven't read it, you might want to get it so you can see how the Europeans, how they play ball and they play dirty. And Zimbabwe's interesting. Brother Irritated Genie, he spoke about Zimbabwe and he went over there. And what he realized is that it was not only that the sanctions were not only because of them taking the land and everything, but as we know, Mr. Mugabe, Baba Mugabe, stood steadfast against homosexuality. And that refusal to capitulate to that agenda the way that Azania has was what really pushed them over the edge and made them to really try to crack down and destroy his government. So that is an aspect of the Zimbabwe situation that people never bring up. So, brother, we've been talking about the continent, and what I want to get into here is this very simple question because I've seen you on, I saw you on Twitter battling with these people. What about those people who are going to tell us that we aren't African? Can you address that whole "we're not African" thing?
Yes. Yeah. I've had a number of wars with them. Well, I think the first problem with that is this: is those of us who are in the diaspora. I don't care if we're in the United States, we're in Jamaica, we're in Haiti, we're in Trinidad, we're in Suriname, we're in Brazil, wherever we're at. We have to come to the realization and boldly state and proclaim and reclaim, our African lineage, our identity, without waiting for the validation of others, and that includes even Africans on the continent. And see, I think the problem is some of these people who are of the diaspora, particularly here in the United States, who said, we don't need to claim that we're African, and we'll just be simply Black American, or we'll just simply be this, and we don't have to get into all of that. Some of them have received personal or individual, negative experiences, I'm sure, with Africans who have, come here as immigrants. And they look to those individuals as their means of approval of this is this person. If this Nigerian comes here and says that I'm African, then maybe I am actually African, right? But if he doesn't treat me like I am African, or questions that I'm African, then I'm going to subscribe to that notion. So that's the first issue that I see with a lot of that. We're waiting in a lot of cases for that. So it's caused us to drift into other ideologies. A lot of it also has to, of course, deal with self-hatred. Since we've been children, and even our grandparents, and some of us, our great grandparents, we've always had the propaganda and negative imagery of Africa pushed on us, right? One of my favorite one of Malcolm X's or last speeches that he did. There's actually a book called Malcolm X: The Last Speeches, and it covers some of this. Um, this was actually Malcolm gave this speech in Detroit just shortly before, a week before he was killed, and he talked about how you can't hate the roots of a tree and not end up hating the tree. You can't hate your origin and not end up hating yourself. So you can't have a negative attitude towards Africa and not have a negative attitude to yourself. And so I think because of a lot of that propaganda growing up, and Malcolm was saying this in 1965, so this has been going on, of course, but because of that, it's caused us to want to just be away from that in any which way. So, this is how these other movements have been popping up, this Aboriginal nonsense, this indigenous movement. And what, everything is to get away from saying that we're African. There's a shirt that one of my comrades had that I thought was pretty cool. It said African, no hyphen, right? Where it's like some of us feel like we have to add African American. We can't just say African. But, I've worked on, at different jobs growing up with Filipinos and other Asians, and I never hear them say that they're not Asian. I used to work with a Filipino girl who was born and raised in the United States. She had never been to the Philippines, and she would never have any problem saying whether she was Filipino or whether she was saying or whether claiming that she was Asian. But when it comes to a black person, it's like, oh, we can be everything but African in the United States, and it's like, oh, where did we come from? Of course. So that has to be dealt with internally, for us to be able to maneuver through that. And for me, whether an African on the continent or whether an African in the diaspora, states that I am African or not African, I I'm not going to wait or accept their definition. I know what I am. I know what we are, and I embrace it in every which way, despite whether they approve me of that or not. So we got to really get past a lot of that mentally.
Yes, sir. And it's so interesting you said that people take one negative experience, because one of the things we see now is brothers will take one negative experience with the sisters. They get rejected by a sister that they like or something like that. Then all of a sudden they don't date any black women anymore. So I just find it interesting that we have that same situation where somebody might interact with a brother or sister from the continent, and we never look at from our perspective that when people come from the continent, the type of interactions they may have with our people here, because we know and understand that a lot of our people are asleep. So, and they have, like you said, a lot of negative, they have a negative opinion of Africa. So when these brothers and sisters come here, a lot of times they look to us for friendship and things like that, and they get rejected. But then we'll turn around and say we had a negative experience with them, not realizing that that person had a negative experience with us, and we never really sit down a dialogue about this thing. And I remember having a conversation with a brother, and I can't even remember what country he's from. He might have been Zimbabwe, but I can't remember. But it was years ago, and we were talking, and he said, it wasn't until I started to read y'all history and what you had been through that I had a whole new respect for what y'all have accomplished here. And then that just opened up a dialogue, and we just started talking, and we just started talking about the culture. And I started telling him about the whole African centered movement that was in DC. And, he couldn't believe it. And he was like, oh man, please invite me to these events and let me know, things like that. And it just opened up a whole new world of understanding between us. And I think that's the easiest way for us to bridge that gap.
I agree. I really agree because ultimately, knowledge of our people will create the spaces of healing and really get rid of this divide and gap that we have as a group. And so that that has to be done both ways, and we have to learn about their experience, but they have to learn about ours. Like I could say, even for myself, a number of Africans that I hold near and dear, and who are close associates of mine, who've come from the continent, have been able to learn and experience that themselves. There's a sister I used to know, or sister I knew a couple of years back. She was from Uganda. She was born in Uganda. What's interesting is that her mother was actually a black woman, born, raised in America, right? And when she was born in Uganda, her father was a continental African. Um, she was raised there for till she was about, I want to say maybe 14 or 15, and then came to the States. And she received a lot of some of those same negative things, right? Because we're taught all this negative stuff about Africa, right? But also, what helped her really understand and have an appreciation for Africans in America was through her mother, because she didn't have as close of a relationship with her mother until she came to the States. Because, like I said, she was born and raised in Uganda for the most part. And her mother was, ride or die sister. She was, old school. ain't taking nothing from no peck of wood. Yeah, I mean, how our sisters are, right? And, and so she got to really learn, what a lot of black women and our people in general had to experience dealing, with our enemies here, during Jim Crow and under white domination in the United States. And that made her embrace, Africans from America more. So that knowledge of self is very, very key. And that's why our enemies have always sought to keep it away from us. I remember Nana Amos Wilson, he said something in one of his lectures where he said, those of us, those who recognize the potential of our people, so our enemies that recognize the potential of what we can do, and what they will essentially will do is they understand that every experience that you have is a opportunity to learn, good and bad experiences. So ultimately, if I see that you have the potential to become something that I fear, then I will limit those experiences by any means necessary. So the best way to limit, that is to not teach you anything. So I'm not even going to give you always the whitewash version of what happened. I might just not tell you anything at all. And that way, you'll always be in ignorance of these things. So, that's something that's done with our people there and our people over here. So we have to learn about each other, to create, a stronger unification between the groups.
Yes, sir. And I see brother Hassan has mentioned Memorandum 46. And for those that don't know, actually, I'm actually going to have a lead a discussion on that at the Straight Black Pride convention, and we'll discuss that it is a government elite government memorandum that deals with the Carter administrations at the time, and written in '78. Um, their policy towards black people here and on the continent. So we will be live streaming that. That'll be an interesting discussion. And so you get an opportunity to look in depth at the document, the origin of the document, and some of the claims about it. And, you know, you'll be able to make a decision for yourself. Shout out to Brother Hassan for bringing that up. Now, brother, speaking of Memorandum 46, can you get a little bit into what I call the new tribalism of ADOS, FBA, and some of those other things that I saw you battling on Twitter?
Yeah, so I believe that similar to that indigenous Aboriginal movement, I believe that they are a byproduct of that National Memorandum 46. Um, First off, we have to look into those movements and a lot of times and see like who starts them. right? Um, One of the pioneers of that whole indigenous movement, that cat who did it, um, I believe his name was, or at least one of them was Dane Calloway. And, that guy had like, I think over, close to hundreds of thousands of followers out of nowhere. And then he was like pushing this narrative, and he had like, over a couple of million views on some of his YouTube videos, stating that Africans didn't come from, or excuse me, that blacks in America were not Africans, and so that created a whole movement, and that was some of that internal warfare, between this idea of identifying with Africa and then eventually going against those of us who are African centered, right? And then, the same thing that we're seeing with these other movements, ADOS, the FBA, some of the people who've claimed Black First, all of these, one thing that you will see consistent amongst all of them, they're all very anti-African. Um, they don't want anything to do with Africa. They have an idea about Africa that, basically the Eurocentric narratives that, are always fed to us, that, Africans on the continent sold all of our people into slavery. They don't want anything to do with us. They don't want to build with us. And so they fuel really the agenda of Memorandum 46. And even those on the lower level who might take up some of those ideologies, they fuel that agenda, maybe even, unbeknownst to them. So, what I've always been combating particularly is the narrative that they have on the history of our movements between Africans in the Caribbean and Africans in America. One constant thing that they like to push is that Africans from abroad have never helped Africans in America with anything, and it's totally false. Obviously, all of us know about the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, which we're all celebrating the 100 years of, the Declaration of the Rights of the Negro Peoples of the World from the UNIA Conference of 1920, and, the claiming of our colors for the RBG flag, of course. But there were other Africans in that movement, from the Caribbean and the continent that did that tremendously helped our people here. For example, one of my, in particular, if you get Race First, the book talks about this sister a little bit. There's a sister, Queen Mother Kofi, Mama Kofi, which Kofi is a common Akan name that you see in Ghana. Now, she actually wasn't an Akan herself. She was from the Ga people. They're a whole separate ethnic group in Ghana. But Mama Kofi, she came to the United States. She was, a pretty high-ranking member in the UNIA. And when her and Garvey actually got into conflict, she left the UNIA. She had her own movement. A lot of the organizing that she did was down there in Florida, in like Miami, and other parts of Florida. And this sister was trying to help our people repatriate to Ghana. And this is when Ghana was still, a British colony at this time. So Ghana wasn't even totally free yet. And she was over here helping brothers and sisters trying to get free from Jim Crowism and lynchings. And unfortunately, that sister was assassinated, actually. This is in the 1920s. But they didn't return her body to Ghana. She's actually buried in Jacksonville. To this day. So you can look that up. That's, one great example. Another example is Cyril Briggs. People don't know about Cyril Briggs, and he was targeted by J. Edgar Hoover as well, seen as one of the more dangerous threats to the American social order in the 1920s. Cyril Briggs, after being put out by the UNIA, he formed the ABB, the African Blood Brotherhood. And Cyril Briggs created an armed militia of blacks to take up arms against the whites in the Tulsa massacre. So there are newspaper clippings that you can find of the African Blood Brotherhood talking about defending our people in Tulsa when the whites were coming in and burning down all of our businesses and slaughtering our people. So we don't know about that. Cyril Briggs was born in the Caribbean. Um, Denmark VC, who organized what would have probably been maybe the biggest uprising against slavery in America. Denmark VC was born in the Caribbean. That's how he got the name Denmark, because he was born at the time in what we call the U.S. Virgin Islands today. But before that, they were the Danish Virgin Islands. These were Danish colonies. So the Danish people coming from Denmark. That's how he got the name Denmark VC. So he was born in the Caribbean first and was brought here. So all across the board, another example I have, if you get the book, The Judas Factor, the 25th anniversary, there's two copies. There's a 1992 version, but there's a 2017 version. So The Judas Factor, the 25th anniversary, the life and death of Malcolm Shabazz. There's a whole chapter in that book dedicated to Patrice Lumumba. And in that chapter, they talk about how the author goes into how Lumumba, when he came to the United States, he was also going to meet with Malcolm X. And his meeting was intercepted by the intelligence communities. This is in 1960. Year, of course, before Lumumba is taken out and assassinated. So Africans from the continent and in the Caribbean have always been invested in our movements, from Jean-Jacques Dessalines to Garvey, to, like I said, Patrice Lumumba, to Kwame Nkrumah, and many, many others. So our when we really study our history more properly and more in a global sense, we'll see how our struggles on both sides of the world have been intertwined one way or another.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
And it's interesting you mentioned Malcolm X because if I'm not mistaken, Malcolm X was offered a position in, I believe he's offered a position in Nkrumah's government, but before his assassination, but he turned it down because he wanted to organize and build with our people here.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it was, I'm pretty sure it was in Nkrumah's government. It's either in Nkrumah's government or Ahmed Sekou Toure. It was one of the two, and he turned that down in order to. The brother said it was Toure. Brother Hassan said it was Toure, but he turned that down to continue to do the work here, and we know what happened with that. But it's so interesting. You mentioned the we talked about the mulatto factor earlier, and we talked about some of the movements that the anti-African movement. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I'm gonna read this real quick. Because you talked about the ADOS, and if I'm not mistaken, correct me. That's Yvette Carnell and what's the other brother's name?
Tone something. He goes by Tone Talks. I just know him by that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we talked about the mulatto factor, and we talking about how ADOS is anti-African. I don't know if you know this, so I'm gonna read this. This is Breaking Brown, Yvette Carnell tweet from 5/11/19. It says, "And my family is a mixed family in a whole bunch of ways, meaning my parents are a mixed race couple. So my dad is a white Jewish man, and my mom is a black woman from Toledo, Ohio." Are we surprised now at the ADOS movement when those are the roots of the movement? Brother, what do you think about that?
Two of the most insidious combinations: mulattoes and small hats. So, um, and I think that went over a lot of our people's heads over here because, uh, it's like Chancellor Williams said, how our idea of race and mulattoes is very skewed and different here in the United States versus other parts of the world because the rules were a bit different, right? So us here in the U.S., because if you look at the black codes, or even if you look at the slave codes of 1790 or 1705 in Virginia, they state how mulattoes were, supposed to be relegated to the same position as blacks here, right? So during Jim Crow, even when you had mulattoes, they were still supposed to be discriminated against. They were still supposed to be treated as, the same way that, the rest of the Africans were. So us in the U.S., because we grew up more with that, we treated mulattoes more as, just regular black people who had two black parents, right? And so I see that today with the whole ADOS thing and an Yvette Carnell, because we have that experience for the most part here in the U.S. We look at it and view it that way. There wasn't usually, a separate racial classification for mulattoes, with the exception of if you're looking at more like Louisiana, for example, and French, which was a French colony, right? They had a different set of laws, which they called the Free Persons of Color or Free People of Color laws, which is another reason why our people don't need to be using that term, people of color. And that allowed mulattoes or those who have mixed race to get certain benefits and not the same treatment that enslaved Africans were being treated here in America. But for the most part, outside of that, that's our understanding here in America. So that goes over our heads when we see a mixed race, person. We often are like, oh, well, that person's black. A lot of our people just subscribe to that. And then, if they're talking about some type of black issue or black, economics or whatever have you, they jump in the forefront of, that type of movement, not knowing our relationship with mulattoes globally, of not knowing Chancellor Williams' work, and not knowing anything about small hats either, and how insidious they have been in terms of the destruction of Africans.
Yes, sir. And also, as the sister pointed out, and she's also a homophile as well. So she's a small hat mulatto homophile. I don't think it gets any worse than that for the destruction of our people. Um, Quickly, brother, can you get into, because we have about 15 more minutes? Can you get into the whole Muammar Gaddafi situation? A lot of people seem to be confused about that.
Oh man, okay, all right. So Gaddafi was not an ally of Africans. Gaddafi was first off, he was an Arab. Gaddafi was an Arab nationalist. He tried to unite other Arab nations. I forget the name of the conference that he once held, but he essentially was trying to unite with all of the Arab establishments in northern Africa. Gaddafi also was praised and gave praise to President Nasser, who was the former president of Egypt, which many people have mistaken him for being African himself, and he was another Arab. But what has confused a lot of our people is that Muammar Gaddafi was an enemy of the West and the enemy of the United States at one point. But that doesn't mean that he was essentially an ally of African people. Gaddafi even invaded Chad. I believe that was in the late 70s, and killed our people there. Um, Gaddafi himself occupying Libya is a byproduct of all of the Arabic imperialism and invasion and enslavement of our people in Northern Africa, because Libya at one point, all of North Africa, but Libya in particular as well, was that was a black area. That's our people. The people that we see there now today, Gaddafi's dead now, but like a Gaddafi even then, those are all descendants of our initial and original colonial enemies before we ever dealt with any, far Western Europeans. We we went to war with them, and so I think because we saw how Gaddafi attempted to rise up against the West, people, and because he was a president in quote unquote Africa, but not an African himself, our people have mistakenly thought that he was, in, on our team or on our side. I have a couple of comrades who've even, sent me some information about Gaddafi and some of the negative rhetoric that he used to say about Africans, referring to us as lazy as well. So, I mean, he was no different than any other white colonizer, that we've had. Our people just got to get out of this savior complex and understand that we don't have any friends, as Nana John Henry Clark told us, right? We don't have any friends. We've never had any friends. And that's why Africans are under siege everywhere. And, it's going to take us, coming together as a people to, solve our problems and to end our plight. So, we really got to look at the history of Gaddafi as well before he proclaimed to be a so-called Pan-Africanist, because he was talking about Pan-Arabism and Arab nationalism. Nothing with Africans. So, basically that agenda failed. And that's when he decided to, then be a so-called Pan-Africanist, and try to unite the continent against the West. But it was really to the betterment and benefit of Gaddafi, of Libya. And, I told a comrade this the other day, if Gaddafi was such an ally of Africans, then when he was in power and Africans were being enslaved and murdered in other parts of North Africa, which are occupied by Arabs, I never saw Gaddafi try to rise up and end that. And our people are still being enslaved in various parts of Northern Africa today, in Morocco, and obviously Libya and Mauritania and others. So, we got to get that through our heads. Like, he was not a friend, he was not an ally, and he was an enemy, just like the rest.
Yes, sir, brother. Harsh truths for our people out there, because, like you said, we're always looking for some help. But as Nana John Henry Clark said, we need to start by looking in the mirror. So, very quickly, brother, we're gonna close out shortly. But the question I want to ask real quick from this again comes from your Twitter friends. Address the what they call Pan Africanism being dead, but I call African nationalism because if you know about the Greek god Pan, you don't want to put that in front of anything African.
Right.
Just address this whole concept of global African nationalism being dead.
Yes. Well, it's never been dead. Our movements have been thwarted time and time again. Like, obviously with Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint, even when he was captured by the French and eventually and was killed, of course, Toussaint, before that, he was attempting to set up a base in Dahomey. And this was, to this Toussaint's mistake, but he attempted to fund this base and this setup in West Africa to block the transatlantic slave trade by giving money to Stephen Girard. And Girard, of course, stole that money, and we all know what he did with it, going to Philadelphia, starting banks and what have you. And then Girard became one of the most richest men in America at that time, especially after Toussaint's death. But our movements from Dessalines to Toussaint to Maurice Bishop, which is even more recent, in Grenada. He tried to unite our people and was killed in the 80s. Under the Reagan administration. To Patrice Lumumba, to Thomas Sankara. our movements have been thwarted time and time again. And I think what our people need to realize is what the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey had said, and you see this in Race First as well, where he said, "A strong man is strong everywhere," and ultimately it's because he has a strong nation behind him. So, when we look at African people's plight in our current position in the world, it's because Africa is really not strong. Um, it's because we don't have a nation to uh, step in and say, enough is enough. For example, in the 1800s, there was a group of Italians that were lynched. I believe it was in New Orleans, and at the time, people thought that some of them were black because some of these Italians were darker skinned. If you look at some of the people in Sicily and whatnot, you'll see some of this. And the Italian government was so furious at this that they were on the verge of going to war with America at the time. Well, America didn't want to go to war with Italy. So what America did, they publicly apologized for the lynchings and they compensated all of the descendants, family members. This is more than they've even done for black people when they've been lynching black people, even to this day with the George Floyd or the Breonna Taylor killings. They've never done something like that for the most part, of course, to acknowledge that for black people. But ultimately, America had to take heed, to what Italy was stating because these groups of Italians, they had a nation behind them. Our people need to understand that here in America and in Brazil and other parts of the diaspora as well, is that we have to, as diasporans, make our moves back to Africa, whether it's full repatriation or just actually focusing a lot of our efforts in building these places to make them economically strong, militarily strong, and politically strong, to get up from under the thumb of our enemies globally, because that's what we don't have. We're on an island, pretty much wherever we're at. So when you kill a black person, you do something to a black person, especially in the United States, I mean, it's like, who's going to come in and step in and save us and speak on behalf of us to, stop these things from reoccurring? And that was what the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey's vision was for our people. And so we shouldn't stray away from that. Is what we, really should internalize as a group. So, whether we like it or not, that's the way things work. That you don't see this happening to East Indians and they come to America. You don't see this happening to Chinese people. We haven't seen mass protests having to happen, on the death or the murder of a Chinese person being killed in that manner. If that happened, China would step in immediately and be like, America, what are you doing with our people over there? We haven't seen this happen to any North Koreans or South Koreans. If this happened to Koreans over here, Kim Jong-un would have something to say about it, right? So that's what all of these other groups have that African people do not have. And the one advantage that African people do have is that our racial and claim and birthright is Africa, which is the most abundant, rich economically or resourcefully rich place in the world. So we can become the most powerful people in the world if we're able to make Africa strong once again as it was prior to all of our wars and invasions. So that needs to be our vision that we have as a people.
Yes, sir, brother. I concur completely. We're going to close out shortly, but if you have any final words you want to say, and also remind the people where they can find you on social media, and let us know some of the work that you're doing where you're at.
Yes. So currently, the last few years, I've done a number of work in the community out here in Dallas, Texas. A few years ago, I hosted I've done a few back to school drives actually, but one of them was actually both of them really, but they're completely African centered. In terms of, I've actually been getting backpacks, or was getting backpacks from Ghana to our children here to, really get them to embrace our cultural values at a young age. I really encourage a lot of Black parents to do that. Get them while they're young. Because when they grow up in this society, it's going to teach them to be anti-African. So it's like Baba Baruti says, there's only one way to really raise our children, and it's like that. We can't look at it as an option, or else they're going to grow up to hate themselves and hate their heritage. And that'll be problematic for us as a people moving forward. But other things I'm doing right now, aside from that, I'm doing a lot of, right now I've just been studying the Akan language, culture, and whatnot, so I can just become fluent in the language to take a lot of my investment or business ventures into the country of Ghana. A lot of Africans, especially from America, have been repatriating there, contrary to popular belief. Even when I was in Ghana, I actually linked up with some Africans who were from New York and Chicago. I got to give a shout out to One Africa, that's actually ran by two diasporan Africans, Mama Amicus and Brother Shabazz. So if you are planning to go to Ghana, whenever the borders open back up, I recommend going to the resort. It's called One Africa. It's right there in Elmina. They're looking to build with a number of our people who are coming back to the continent as well. So that's, what I'm working on a lot right now. And really just trying to, use my resources in any which way to help our people economically or physically. Right now also I'm involved in out here in Dallas, getting involved in the construction of a grocery store, also out here to help feed our people. So I'll have some more details for that probably in the coming weeks as well. But as far as where you can find me at, you can find me on Instagram. That's Kwesi _the _Loa. Kwesi is spelled KWESI _THE_LWA. It's Kwesi Loa. You can find me there. Shoot me a DM. And like I said, I'm just looking for like-minded Africans who, understand our problem, want to take our skills to the continent as well. And I've built a number of connections in Ghana as far as real estate is concerned, and other forms of investment. So, like I said, just hit me up, because there's a lot of work that our people got to get to doing.
Yes, sir, brother. Well, we appreciate you coming on, and I just have to let people know we did not prep for this interview or discussion at all, but I knew that the brother's well versed in the subject matter, so I decided to just throw him a few questions and let him take charge. I hope everyone has enjoyed this discussion, and again, I found it very enlightening, and I think that there's a lot of information that the brother brought that our people need to know. So, with that being said, again, I am your host, DC Radical One. You can follow me on Instagram at DC.radical, the number one, and on Twitter at DC_radical_ONE. That's at DC_radical_ONE. And also, again, do not forget that August 22nd and 23rd, we're having the Straight Black Pride Movement Convention. The first day will be at Everlasting Life Cafe, 9185 Central Avenue, Capitol Heights, Maryland. The event is free, but we are going to set up registration so that we don't violate any laws in regards to the whole quarantine and whatnot. And then the second day will be in Washington D.C. at Fort DuPont Park. We'll be outside, free food, and get to meet other wonderful African people and enjoy our company, enjoy the sun, and have a good time. So if you're in the DMV area or you can make it to the DMV area, please come through. And with that, I will say a BB for Hodier and straight black pride.